welcome to another episode of the Thunderstock Show. I'm your host, Ross Stockdale, Fractional Chief Marketing Officer and owner of Thunderstock Marketing. Here with Mike, our guest, out of Illinois, EOS implementer, former MMA fighter, graduate of Clemson Leadership Program, an all-around badass dude who's written some books, has some great stories to tell. Excited to have Mike on the show. Mike, how you doing? What's it like over there in Illinois? You're not in Chicago, right? You're more of the suburban rural area.
Yeah, I'm in Naperville, which is 45 miles southwest of Chicago. So yeah, it's cold. It's opening day at Wrigley and it's cold today. It's about 50 degrees outside and it's raw, kind of your typical April day in Chicago,
You got to be built a little different to survive that area of the country during Q1.
That's a great way of putting it. I never thought of it quite that way, but yeah, you're right. Though that 90-day block is not pleasant. It's character,
So speaking of creating character, we talked a little bit off the record. One thing that we had in common was we each had 2 MMA fights and a combined record of 1-3.
Exactly.
We joke it. Not the right person for the right seat for either of us, but
no.
How'd you get into that? What,
Oh, dude, it was the most of my life has been a journey of nonlinear progression. Okay. So this is no different. I used to compete in powerlifting. My last powerlifting event was when I was 46 years old and I blew out my shoulder. And I was looking to stay in shape, but I couldn't lift anymore. So I found an MMA gym. I had no idea what it was. So I go to the MMA gym and I'm working out. And these guys were serious about what they were doing. And I won my weight class. My weight class only had 4 guys in it, and they were mostly big, fat guys. And so it was kind of like the tallest midget kind of thing. But because we won the weight class, there was a local tournament in Addison. I got to go to that and, quickly got my ass kicked twice. So yeah.
But it's cool. It's awesome to hear that you just went for it, right? You just
that's kind of, that was a learned process, I think there's we can get into it way deeper, but when you think about moving into the future is completely uncertain. So any strategy about the future is insane, so what there's choices, and you just make choices, and sometimes they work out and sometimes they don't. And the MMA thing, it worked out because it was I'm so glad I did it. And I learned so much about the human condition, about what motivates people. And I also learned that if you're a suburban guy driving a BMW, you've got no business being in the ring. So, yeah.
That's actually an interesting perspective. We did talk a little bit about philosophy.
Yeah.
You should check out the book if you haven't yet. It's written by Carrie Howley. It's called Throne. Yeah. So she's a PhD out of Iowa who interviews some of the Militich fighting system guys. Eric Koch was one of them. He was a UFC fighter. And she did her PhD in philosophy on MMA.
Okay.
Yeah, on the phenomenology of MMA.
Well, what I learned, so much of MMA, there's the conditioning part of it, and there's the knowing how to fight part of it. But so much of it is who's got the greater will to win.
Oh yeah.
And I learned that in my first fight. I mean, this guy, I was going to have to kill him to win. And I was there. It's a weekend for me,
Right. You're there exactly as if you were competing in a powerlifting competition, which was
exactly.
I'm going to do my best.
Or playing golf, like my level of commitment was nowhere near his. And I learned that early on. And all of a sudden, then you kind of have this like, oh, yikes, what am I doing here? Because you can get hurt, So it was, that was a big wake up call for me. And it also, it pointed to one of the struggles I have all the times. I tend to be relatively arrogant. I think I got it all handled, and this was really one of the big learning points of the cost of arrogance. And I continue to learn that over and over and over again, but it was really, that was like, holy cow. Yeah. Like I really had no business being there.
It's funny. I think that people have the perception of MMA fighters as being these braggadocious, hot-headed, incredibly just always trying to fight. But I think the people like you and I who've gotten in the ring and lost, you have a different kind of respect when you approach interpersonal relationships and when it comes to conflict, where it's like you understand that person that's really quiet over there might be bookish, might be kind of nerdy. he also might be a black belt in jiu-jitsu that could break your arm, you know?
Right.
So
Right.
you have this like different level of respect for everyone, but you also have a more earned confidence where you can always look back at the time when you did step in the cage and hear that click behind you and you go, oh, I came out and I survived. You know,
Exactly.
I did a scary thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the real gifts of it. I'm really, really thankful for the experience and really thankful I don't have to do it anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. So you did that. It was about 20 years ago.
22,
What?
I think. 20, yeah.
22 years ago. Man, back when the UFC was still in its infancy, before it was cool. I mean, it was still,
Before
I thought it was cool.
it was way before it was popular. I'll just say that.
Popular.
It was
Popular is the
cool
right
as
word.
hell, but it was way before it was popular.
So, what about that time?
Mhm.
Like, how did that coincide with your career?
That's really interesting. I had just exited corporate America. I'm a corporate refugee. And I had my own engineering company that was doing okay at the time. So I was an entrepreneur, and I was a kind of the classic entrepreneur. Like, I had no idea about building a leadership team. I had no idea about creating a big vision. What I did was I did what I did in corporate America and brought it out. I was the E-Myth guy, and did it for more money, out in the world. And that's what I was doing. Working hard, but having fun, making good dough, and thought, what the hell, I can do this too, So it was there was really an absence of structure to my life at that point in time. Yeah.
So you just come off your first successful exit. You're the only person, and trust me, my first ever podcast
Yeah.
long ago was just interviewing fighters. So
Yeah.
I've interviewed a lot of fighters.
Mm-hmm.
You're the first fighter that's ever had after their first successful corporate America exit, this is where I'm going to start. Most people are like, oh, I just got done with jail, or I got done with my college wrestling career, or you know.
I was kind of pissed when I left corporate, I guess, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like jail, and so it's such a
Well, it really was. And the thing is I went through a series of 4 different events where I was brought in to unscrew something up, change the process, made it successful, got to a certain level, got invited into the club. Then when I got into the club, they're like, well, you got to do this. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that because I did this. And that's, and it really became clear to me, wash, rinse, repeat 4 times. And I got really clear what corporate America was about. It was about compliance. It was about power. It was about control, and it was about minimum growth, and it was never their money,
That's a good point.
Never their money, but everybody was greedy and everybody wanted the money. So it was all, how can I make more money? And it was really, really fascinating. And I worked for a couple cool companies but whenever there was a change of leadership, there was always a change of direction, and usually never good, especially back then.
Man, it's funny when you say to make more money, because there's people I think that earn money and people that quote unquote make money. And the difference in my mind is like, when you earn it, it's like, hey, you've done an output that necessitates like this is the fair square deal, versus when you make it, it's like, okay, sometimes like you said, you're just rewarded for compliance, you're rewarded for playing the game the way the game should play, not necessarily for deriving better results.
No, and it's interesting because, I heard on one of your other podcasts you talked about the sales guys that get promoted. I was one of those guys. I was a top sales guy that got put to a management position, and in the early days of my management career, I was terrible, but I was committed. I learned, and I think I became a pretty good leader, but not sure I was ever a good manager. But I was really clear on how to make money and how to earn money, like through the sales process,
Yeah.
and I knew how to generate result, so if you told me what the result was, I could get it. I could figure a process out to deliver that result. But what I realized is inside corporate America, sometimes what they told you they wanted isn't what they really wanted. And that became really confusing to me because I'm just a guy from Berwyn, and I'm like, why would you tell me this if this is what you want? Tell me what you want. I'll get it for you. And so, yeah, it was a wake-up call on really the human condition.
Yeah, it's such an interesting jump. I had a unique progression from being an individual producer to being in a leadership team, where it was pretty quick and apparent that I needed some training. And I'm glad
Yeah.
that the owner at the company I was at identified that and got us into EOS. But there was a time in the beginning that, people, I took it as serious. I took the leadership, which in hindsight, it was just probably a mark of bad leadership because I was expecting people to follow it right away. I was
Yeah.
like, if I say this, you should do this. And
Right.
here's the expectation and here's what I need out of you. And this is what it's like to be successful versus like serving the team versus
Right.
like removing obstacles, identifying constraints, all the things that I
Right.
had to learn somewhat the hard way, right, from being bad at it. What were some of the lessons that you had to learn right away in order to develop your leadership?
It wasn't about me.
Yeah.
I mean, it really wasn't about me. It was about the team. And it was about what you said, what a leader's there to do is to provide resources for his team so that they can win, you know? And I think that's really hard, especially for someone who's a really high level individual performer, because they think everyone's going to be like them. I remember when Ted
Mm.
Williams was made manager to Washington Senators, and he thought everyone was a natural 400 hitter. Well, that just isn't the way it is, dude.
No.
You're like unique. And I think that's one of the hardest things for entrepreneurs, especially the really brilliant ones, have this unique perspective of the world and this unique perspective of their business. And the challenge for them is how they can share that perspective such that others see it. You know, that's what I think is
Right.
the big,
Sharing the vision.
that's what it is, man. And that's why EOS is so, I don't know what the word is, productive
Yeah.
or supportive or works so well, is because it's a structure that actually gets the vision out of the dude's head or woman's head and can actually get it into the leadership team, and they can actually get it and understand it. And it's a whole process of understanding it, and you work it through the whole organization. That's the whole idea of it. And that creates alignment. And that's really what you're talking about.
Such an interesting frame because I actually, before our podcast, just got
Yeah.
done with a quarterly offsite for a client,
Hmm.
sitting on their leadership team. And I suggested to the visionary, the founder, I said, I would really like for you to have a scorecard. Did you take an hour clarity break once per week? I was like, I
Hmm.
want an anti-busyness measurable for you
Yeah.
because the reality is when you do take those clarity breaks and you let that person to just be a visionary focusing on the vision.
Yeah.
I mean, this company had grown, 100% plus growth year over year for the first year. We're
Yeah.
already within one quarter almost at 2025 sales goal. And
Yeah.
it's like we got to focus. Really, it's goal setting at this point is one of the major constraints. If we're almost hitting the goals for the year and we're in quarter two, like take some clarity breaks. Like let's help the visionary out. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
fun because I like working with clients where that's the constraint of the business is like how do we as the support team and the other members of the leadership team help
Hmm.
to eliminate roadblocks for the visionary so that they can do their thing,
Yeah.
because too often I find that there's been experiences where the visionary maybe is more what's the word, entitled, or wants this team that he's paying. He's like, oh, I'm paying your salary, therefore you serve me. Versus when you work with a guy who really gets leadership and he serves the team so much that we have to ask him to work less.
Yeah.
It's a cool story.
No, it everyone's different. They're all different. And they all get to that place for different reasons, you know? Sometimes you can have leaders, visionaries that are just so bold and so brilliant that they just dominate every space they're in. And then you can get a team around them. They're like, they're in awe of them, and they just stand there and look at him as opposed to, and wait for him to bark orders to them,
Mm.
as opposed to really just jump up and join them in the journey, but that gets into recruiting too, and finding people that are a good match for you. Yeah, man.
What are some of the pivotal milestones or road markers along the way that you really can point to and look back and say those were times where I leveled up my leadership as a skill? Because I think leadership's a skill.
I think leadership is definitely a skill, but I think it's also an art. Man, I don't know. The first thing I see is all my failings.
Mm.
But I think there's, as an implementer, I think I do a pretty good job of being present and creating the space and asking the questions that allow the leaders in the room to discover really what's important to them. I think that's kind of my core strength, I think. Like, I don't get attached to what's going on, nor do I think I have the answer.
Mm.
That's a big breakthrough, because for a while there, I would, always thought I had to have the answers, and, always thought I had to know everything. And, the truth of the matter is, as I get older, the more I realize how much I don't know.
A theory or a principle from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People: seek first to understand.
Yeah.
And the older I get, the more I realize I bring value to other people by asking them questions. That's thing. I'm doing a podcast, get to ask you questions,
Ross, that's the only value I have. And I think that's really the only value. I think that's one of the big challenges when people becoming implementers, is learning that the real power is in the question they ask and the space they hold. It's really interesting when we go through the training, they say there's, 15% of it is really the content, which is the teaching of EOS, which is really nothing. And there's 50% is facilitation, which is just managing the room so that people are actually being heard and seen. And then the other 35% is a coaching, and the coaching is a really powerful part. And the coaching, my favorite quote about coaching is the Tom Landry quote, where, a coach is somebody who asks you the question you don't want to hear and has you see the thing you don't want to see, so you can become the person you always knew yourself to be.
Oh, I love that quote.
Yeah, it's a great quote. And what it is, it's actually confronting the things that people don't want to deal with, their own fears, and creating a space where they can actually be with that fear, So yeah, I think that's if there's any value I create, it's that.
We'll click on the concept of becoming the person you've always wanted to be. We did talk about our shared affinity for Clemson University.
Yeah.
I haven't been there. You have. My brother is a professor there.
Yeah.
What was it like going through that leadership program? What are some things you learned?
Well, that leadership program I went to was called Being a Leader, and it was led by a guy named Mike Jensen, who was a professor emeritus at Harvard University, and another guy, Werner Erhard, who was one of my mentors. And it was really about leadership, but foundational to leadership, it was the 4 core distinctions of leadership, and really what every great leader shared, these 4 distinctions. And what I learned about leadership is that without integrity, nothing works. And integrity is and I tested it a million times. And if organizations don't operate with integrity, they're really limiting what's possible with them. And integrity is a difficult thing to get. And it's hard for me to judge your integrity. I've got to only manage my own integrity. I can't go around, oh, you've got your integrity's out here or this. That's nonsense. It's about telling the truth. And foundational to that is really the development of self-awareness. So the whole journey of leadership is about people and leadership team really discovering who they are and why they exist and what is their true purpose. And when they get that and you get a group of people aligned, you can conquer the world. You really can.
It makes me think of core values in the framework of EOS.
Yeah.
Where I'm sure if I said, hey, Mike, I want to focus this session on coming up with my core values. My guess is you'd probably say, well, you don't need to invent them. You need to unveil them and
just
discover them, not invent them, not fabricate them, not produce them. It's like, what are your core values? It kind of goes back to your thing of integrity. Like you can't pretend your way into having integrity.
No. And the core values are really what creates the culture of the organization too. And it is a discovery process. And it's, when you start thinking about an organization and building an organization where the people are in alignment, the people in your organization have to share those core values, So without that, they can create conflict. And it's really interesting you talk about the core values. I started looking at some of the issues I've experienced in my career, or the issues I've seen other organizations experience, and almost every time at the root of it is a violation of a core value. And because you're stepping outside of what you're really committed to being, and it's interesting you bring up the core values, because that's my favorite exercise of all the exercises we do with people, is the core value exercise. It's the most unveiling, and it really frees the organization up to start telling the truth, because they really see what ends up happening is you get a group of people in a room, and all of a sudden they share the same core values. It's like, holy shit, how did this happen?
And on the other side, if they don't, it becomes pretty apparent.
If they don't, it becomes very apparent and they exit really quickly. And here's the best part about that. I haven't seen it happen too often. But when someone does exit, it's always done honorably. Now we've got something to talk about. I know why I don't fit here. Or the leader can go, hey, listen, this is what's going on. This is where the gap is. And you could either coach people, and it's hard to coach people in core values. There could be some training and understanding and awakening that maybe they can uncover it for themselves. But mostly it's like, listen, this isn't a fit,
I would say that of the conflicts I've had recently in my corporate career, what you just said, the underlying root would be misalignment of core values. Not with clients, but like, let's just say I might have rubbed a vendor the wrong way if someone else managing, or maybe an employee, took something and they didn't like either the message or how I communicate the message. But I look back on it, and so much of what I do and what we're doing here is just recorded conversation. I look back and I'm like, all right, let me be fair and objective. Let me take this recording of, that might have been the instance or this email, and let me get an outside perspective. And they go, well, Ross, you were direct, respectful, you had your client's best interest at heart, and it seems like, you had sincere candor. I'm like, great, that's one of my core values. And if someone wants to, what's that book, 5 Dysfunctions, to operate in a place of self-preservation or covering their own butt, I'm the guy that's going to call your card and say, let's lock the cage and let's have this heart-to-heart here and put the truth on the table.
That's what, that's one of the things I think I bring is there's not a lot of butt covering that goes on, you know?
Yeah.
And we're not going to step over a lot of stuff because it's a waste of time.
What do you think how would you define your own core values that you've kind of developed for yourself? And what are some of the core values? Obviously you've worked with multiple clients as an EOS implementer, but what are some of the commonalities and core values of some of your favorite people? I don't have to say names, but like some of your favorite clients or some of your favorite companies.
Yeah.
What do you like the most in a core value?
Well, it's interesting. There's one thing, there's always some kind of core value that relates to being good humans, some sense of morality, some sense of acceptance, right? There's always one of those. There's always some kind of gritty core value, like grinder, gritty, get shit done kind of thing. Those are I absolutely love. And it's funny because these are mostly reflections of me. So I see a lot of my clients. I know they're my clients,
Yeah.
There's going to be a fun component, like where they take what they do serious, but they don't take themselves too serious, I love
and
that. Then there's always going to be a quality component, like what they're doing. They're going to be the best in the world at what they do. I think those are the common ones I see over and over again,
Another thing that we have in common is we both wrestled.
I didn't really wrestle. I was bad at wrestling. I got my ass kicked in wrestling, but yeah, I wrestled a little bit. I wasn't a hardcore wrestler like you though.
And what I found is wrestling, I would say going through a wrestling season was harder than MMA because of all the weigh-ins you had to do. It was just like, if you weren't, it sucked worse than MMA. Okay. That's what I'll say. And I loved it. It's hardcore, but I got to meet and interact with people that were like the very top, like, ranked up there, probably because where I lived growing up, there's just near Penn State and things like that. And one of the things I love talking about core values, that was just this time of year, right? We just got done with the national tournament. It's like, it's the end of the year. It's like the Super Bowl for wrestling. And I watched an interview and it just blew my mind. It was about the Penn State team. Coach Cale Sanderson said one thing. He goes, I want to change the stigma of wrestling that it's all about breaking your opponent and just inflicting damage and grinding and gritting it out, which, you should still be tough. He goes, I want my team to be, most importantly, first and foremost, better human beings from the beginning of the season to the end of the season. And he goes, I want them to have fun. And they start to practice playing games and becoming friends and getting tight, getting that group cohesion. Yep. And a friend of mine said that before the national tournament, they would celebrate winning before it happened. Mm-hmm. Well, like this attitude of gratitude. The reason I share that story is because a lot of the core values that you look for in clients are the same ones that Coach Cale says, this is how we do things. And he's, I would argue, the most successful sports dynasty in the last 20 years in college sports, maybe ever.
Yeah. 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 No, I think that, the truth of the matter is, I can't speak for everyone, but I've been blessed. My life has been a blessing. And you go through this journey and you start, and there's always struggle and there's always stuff that happens and there's all kinds of things that are not great, But the truth of the matter is having an attitude of being grateful, and one of abundance and one of growth, I think is the thing that will catapult you through the toughest times, and it's, I'm always curious about people with scarcity mindsets. Like, wow, that's a funny way to be,
Yeah, it's interesting. Where do you think the scarcity mindset, or where do you think in the people with abundance mindset,
mm-hmm.
they chose that path when they could have had the scarcity? And where do you think people with the scarcity mindset chose that path when they could have an abundance mindset? Like, what's the psychology behind it?
Well, there's a great book called The Seat of the Soul by Gary Zukav. I don't know if you ever read it.
Not yet.
He basically says human beings come from one of two places, love or fear, right? Mm-hmm. And so love is always forward looking. And it's not too different than the mindset book that, growth or scarcity, but it's much more philosophical because Gary Zukav's a PhD in divinity from Harvard. So it's very poetically written, and it's a beautiful book, and he's a pretty cool and interesting guy. He's really old now, but it's really about, where are you coming from? And if you really get like what love is just accepting things, and it's not arguing with reality,
Yeah. Love is just accepting things. I love that quote.
Yeah. That's what it is, man. And it's no longer arguing with reality. And one of the things that's happened with us, I think, is if you think about it, we've gone through an incredible period of time in the last 20 years, starting in like 2003 to 2008, the amount of data and information that's, floods us every day is just goes up, and it goes up and up and up. And the more AI there is, the more information and data there is. And it's exceeded our ability to actually manage it. If you go back in 1945, when Dwight Eisenhower was going to invade Normandy, he could get all the information he needed to make an informed decision. There was no ambiguity. There were no questions. He got all the data, all the information. He looked at it. He took some time, digested the information. We can't do that today anymore, So we're always in some condition of overwhelm. So what we've got to do, we're actually in a new realm of human existence, right? So we've got to come up with new ways of operating. We can't come up with the traditional ways. So the high fact finder way and the way of always doing research and this type of stuff, I think is personally obsolete. So what's left? You've got to start relying on intuition. You've got to start relying on something greater than you. You've got to start relying on others. You've got to build, coalitions and teams. That's what I see as kind of the new operating method that leads to success moving forward.
When you say high fact finder, I have to assume you're talking about a Kolbe assessment, at least.
I mean, that's one example. The person who's always asking questions, like a million questions, they can't ask enough questions. Yeah.
I'm a high fact finder according to the Kolbe Index. Okay. High fact finder, but also high quick start.
See, that's really an interesting combination. See, I'm a high quick start. My fact finder is really in the middle. I need to know enough so I don't blow myself up.
But maybe that's why I've done 300 podcasts.
That's exactly why. Well, here's the other thing. Here's the cool part about being a high fact finder is you're naturally curious.
Oh, yeah.
But the high fact finder with a low quick start, though, is going to be somebody who's going to get bogged up in the detail and will, overanalyze things.
Yeah, I have a brother. He's a math professor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And he's been on the same career journey since 5th grade, and that's fine.
Exactly.
But would I want to hire him as a marketer? Hell no.
Hell no.
And that's okay.
Some of the most interesting people I've ever met are the people that have, their Kolbe scores are like 3.3, 10.3,
Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've got a client that's his profile, and also Dan Sullivan. I don't know if you know who Dan Sullivan is.
Dan Sullivan's a prolific author. Was he the Gap in the Gain, 10x?
Yeah, he's the strategic coach guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's his Kolbe. It's something
and Ben Hardy.
Yeah.
A co-author.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, those people, they're just like, well, we talked about it earlier. I can only imagine what like Stephen Jobs was or Winston Churchill's. They're just the go for it folks, Like, yeah, let's just
Yeah,
go
Steve Jobs must have been like a 12 on Quick Start, huh?
quick start
Like off the
12. Yeah,
charts.
yeah, off
Yeah.
the charts. Yeah, exactly. And what was great about him, he had Wozniak, who I'm sure was like an 8 or 9 fact finder.
Oh, had to be.
Had to be, and they created the perfect balance. I mean, those guys were you talk from an EOS standpoint. You talk about rocket fuel. Those guys were cool.
Visionary and integrator, the perfect wombo combo.
Exactly, and they drove each other nuts, but that's okay. Look what they built.
I love how you frame that story though, because so often do we see entrepreneurial stories with like the face, right? You just have the one.
Right.
It's like what I've found and what I think you're referring to with that dynamic between integrator and visionary is that it's usually not just the one, it's what's the counterpart to the one, who's the other, right?
Yeah.
Like Ray Kroc for McDonald's, he has a wonderful movie out there, probably a book, Phil Knight, Shoe Dog.
Yeah.
First of all, love that movie. Ben Affleck. Ben Affleck, that's right.
Yeah.
Plays him excellently, but there's the counterpart to that you don't really talk about, that he doesn't get as mentioned. It's not as famous, which is fine. And it goes all the way down to even successful small business owners. It's like
it goes everywhere, man.
If that balance is out of whack, you got to solve for that.
Yeah, and it's often the missing link in many organizations. The visionary, and part of it is the visionary won't let go. Because to have a successful integrator, there has to be an element of letting go. So as whacked as Jobs was, you knew he let go to some level to let Wozniak do what he did. Ronnie Howard, Opie, who's been the successful movie guy. He's this visionary, this really mellow guy. He's got a partner, Brian Glazer, who's just the ultimate no guy, complete pain in the tuchus. Like you don't want to deal with him. Before I got into this, I had a construction company. I did a lot of business with the White Sox, and Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner of the White Sox, he had a guy named we called him Dr. No because he answered it. Howard, what was his
Dr. No.
We called him Dr. No because he answered every question or every opportunity was no. And
hey, as someone that likes a good fight,
yeah,
then that's the ultimate litmus tester. Is this idea worth doing? Because if you can get the no to a yes, it's a real yes.
It's interesting.
It goes back to trust. There's two different kinds of yeses. There's a hell yeah, which is like an enthusiastic, I'm bought in, committed to the yes. And there's that yes that when you don't read the terms and conditions of a software update, you just click the check box and said you read it. I agree. There's that yes.
Well, there's also the yes that this better work. Yes, like if it doesn't, I'm going to wear you out. Yes, which was the Dr. No. When he did say yes, that was the yes you got from him, and you're like wondering, if this thing's really going to work. I used to do some construction stuff for the White Sox, and I did this one project. It was a couple $1 million, and we're having this big thing. It was a big deal, and we're having this event where they're showing this off. And he comes out and he stands next to me and goes, "This better freaking work." I'm like, it will. But yeah. So, but those guys are great because they hold you to account.
Well, right? Because even the person with a million ideas, it's not that you have 100% certainty in every idea. Right. It's the play. It's the curiosity. Like, what if? And then let's try. That's where I come from with a lot of things. Like, here's an idea. If it's successful, then this result would be what I would predict. Yeah. I won't know until I try. So the answer for me is yes, because I want to know.
Right.
And I talked to a guy, not a client. I would consider him a buddy. He's my barber. And we were talking about his business. And between haircuts, he just caught me out of a strategy session, and I was full work mode, and it's hard for me to turn it off. Yeah. And I started asking him about his business. I kind of was working on him while he was working on me, which probably, if you're at someone else in the shop, like, why the hell is this guy doing this? And at the end, I was like, so what's your offer and who's your target audience? Kind of VTO in him. And I said, you should double your prices. And he goes, you're crazy. And I said, here's the math. According to this conversation, on my phone, I'm underneath, I'm in your chair. And he goes, well, I stayed up real late after I cut your hair that night a month ago. Talked to my wife. She said you're absolutely right. So I wasn't feeling it. And he goes, guess what? I lost 0 clients and I now make more money and I work less hours.
Right.
And I'm like, so I was like, thank God I was right, because you're holding a razor to my neck right now.
That's excellent, man.
So, what are some of the most rewarding experiences you've had as an implementer? Like where you've gotten to uncover and really get the right fit for a client and get those breakthroughs with their core values and have those aha moments. What are some of the results that you remember most? Like, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, there's been a few. There's one client, they did the rollout, after the vision building day 2, you do a rollout. And of course, they waited till after the first quarterly to do the rollout because really conservative real estate company, land manager, that type of thing. And they rolled it out. And I know the visionary pretty well. I've known him for quite a while. I would consider him a friend. And he rolled it out kind of reluctantly. And he's kind of an introvert, quiet guy. And he expected the meeting to go 15 minutes. And when he rolled it out to the people in his organization, went an hour and a half long. All they did was pepper him with questions. All they did was want more. And then they said, why didn't you do this sooner? And it really freed him up. It freed them up. And the organization has completely blown up since that time. So that's one of the coolest things. Another one, I had a guy, just recently kind of do it. And he's one of these guys. I talked to him for 2 years before he actually took it on. And he's a high fact finder guy, IT guy. And he did their focus day, which is the first day. And he calls me on Wednesday. He goes, it's already paid for itself for the first year, just in what we got. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Yeah. He said it. Oh yeah. And then I had another guy who owned a construction company, and he's a former basketball player. He got injured and he wasn't able to he's got a seasonal construction company. He wasn't able to start the season with his team. And so he just empowered his leadership team to begin the season. He said, Mike, he says, if I didn't do EOS, I would have lost well over $50,000. And so just things like that, and all it is, Ross, is simply just creating structure and letting people understand what their roles are clearly, and that's the accountability chart. That's really it. The accountability chart and scorecard, you get those 2 things down, man. It's just, the rest is wash, rinse, repeat, man.
You have me so hyped up on this Friday afternoon. I have a quarterly session with another client because it's the time of the year, right? You're at the beginning of quarter 2, end of quarter 1. You start doing those sessions, and I don't implement, but I'm on the team and I've got my pitch, my idea. Client doesn't use EOS. They are founders. This is their second, third, fourth. The team, they've all done successful exits before. Young guys, hungry guys. Yeah. They do OKR, so objective key result. I don't know. Okay. Sort of. It reminds me of a rock and scorecard thing. And first 2 weeks, they're like, what's our new goal? What are we measuring? Should we hire this, do that? And I just keep saying, let's talk after the quarterly. The quarterly. I'm not going to tell you what I think yet. I'm going to do my best to shut up and just use my ears and listen and ask you questions. Yeah. And I peppered them with questions, did my whole thing. And a lot of the questions, like it's crazy how they're like, hey, we really thought about this and I can't wait to get your feedback on what's our accountability chart. And I'm like, that's the opposite of what you were talking about 2 weeks ago. So we're already on the right track, right? Because it's who, not necessarily what, or not necessarily how. Right. When you get the right people on the bus, in the right seats. And my job is to identify what are the right seats. Is this the right person for that seat? And is there everything underneath the LMA, right? Are there accountability bullet points? I don't remember what we'll call them. Measures. The right ones. Yeah, measures. Yeah. And it's so cool because if I never did EOS, I would have no freaking clue.
Well, what ends up happening is if you don't have the structure of EOS, especially the goal junkies. I mean, there's a lot of goal junkies out there. Shit, I was one, right? Let's go get this next goal. And you get the goal and you're left empty because now what? And you just start getting all these random goals. And what can actually happen is you can start pulling the organization apart because these goals aren't aligned. And I think that's the real power of it. When you start, when you create a 10-year picture and a 3-year, 3-year picture and 1-year plan, you start aligning this stuff. This is stuff that's important. And it allows you to shut out the noise, especially in a world today where we got so much of it,
How do you, I'm going to ask you a question, not about EOS or corporate. Sure. What are some of the measures that you take in your life to shut out that noise, to keep you healthy and grounded?
Man, it's a really interesting question. I'm an old guy. I never had any health issues in this last 3 months. So I'm going through a whole new thing of really paying attention to what I eat, how much I sleep, what my daily activities are, that type of thing, really being present to how I go about living my life and what are the important things. That's really it. I would have given you a completely different answer 4 months ago, and I'm not sure that answer 4 months ago was even close to reality, but I think simple diet, exercise, sleep are really at the core of it, and then there's always, and I think this is always undersold, and it's personal. And I don't like speaking about it too much because it is so personal, but there's the spiritual component.
Mm-hmm.
What's your spiritual belief? What's the part of you? What gives you being in action that's greater than you? And really defining what that is. I think that's essential for everyone. Because if not, then you're left just being a narcissist.
Everyone worships something, whether they admit it or not. Even atheists, they worship something they probably just won't tell you.
Well, it may be themselves, it may be money, it may be drugs, rock and roll, could be any of that. And it's really understanding that and understanding what really gives you purpose. And I think that's been the biggest growth for me in the last several years, is really the understanding the spiritual component and really honoring it and integrating it fully into my life.
Yeah, there's something to be said, what you said about the basics, right? I think John Wooden, infamous basketball coach, started every season with the same drill. All right, everyone, we're going to tie your shoes.
Yeah.
And we're not going to do the next lesson until you can get your socks pulled up the right way and your shoes fitting properly. And they're like, why would you do that? Oh, well, here's why. Because if your shoes aren't on right and they're slipping and falling and your socks are not on right and they're causing an issue, you're going to maybe lose your footing. The end result of that, get blisters or roll an ankle, tear an ACL. My job is to keep you as healthy as possible to perform your best. Mm-hmm. And I love that winners always, they never don't do the basics, which means they always do the basics.
Well, do you remember Vince Lombardi? Gentlemen, this is a football. That's how he started every training camp. Ain't hold up a freaking football. Gentlemen, this is a football. And they would make fun of him, but everybody remembered it. And I think that's a big part of being a leader, is to say the things over and over and over and over again, regardless of if people are going to make fun of you or not, or make jokes about it, because it's so important.
Are you familiar with Abingdon, Illinois?
Abington,
Illinois.
No.
All right. Well, I thought there was a chance. It's in Knox County.
Oh, that's got to be downstate somewhere. Yeah.
Okay. Well, James Bond Stockdale, we share a last name. Mm-hmm. He's also one of the contributors to Good to Great, which is the EOS library. One of the hardest things for an SEO for me is having to compete with somebody that has my last name that ran for president or vice president in 1992 with Ross Perot. And he got kind of made fun of quite a bit, which I think anyone that was an admiral in the Vietnam War and spent 7.5 years in the Hanoi Hotel deserves a little bit more grace than what he got from the publicity. But he started out a presidential debate with, who am I? Why am I here? And they thought this guy was just lost and old and confused. He actually had a PhD in philosophy. And I think framing those questions when you enter any given pursuit, right? It's just like the identity principle. It's like, who am I? Why am I here? And if everyone goes to the leadership table at an EOS session, everyone reflects on these simple questions, it's not a sign of dementia or that you're confused. It's a reaffirmation that you have to really be intimately familiar with your identity. Like, this is a football. Like, this is who I am. This is my purpose. When you can re-articulate that, because most people need reminding more than they need to be instructed.
Well, and sometimes they need to be discovered, like when you talk about who am I and why am I here, simply stated, that is the core values. Who am I? This is our culture. This is who we are. And why am I here? This is a core focus.
Yeah.
This is the value we provide, and this is the niche we provide it to. This is our purpose, cause, and our passion. And this is who we bring it to. And that's, who am I and why am I here? And then the big what? That's the big, hairy, audacious goal, the 10-year target. This is kind of what we see, is really driving us. And that's one day of work. And it's unbelievable how when you ask people that, they give you they talk around it, but they can't clearly articulate it. And when someone can clearly articulate it and they bring it to their team, it becomes an aha moment. Because then the team's like, oh, that's really cool. Or they're not in and they're out. It eliminates the ambiguity inside the organizations. That's what's so important about it.
And that's what that means to decide, right?
Yeah.
is to
Exactly.
kill off alternatives.
Yeah.
Hey, if I can help you to choose to make a decision, that sometimes is the greatest help you can give someone.
Exactly, man. It's actually access to freedom, which I think is what the whole reason we do what we do.
That's a really deep thought. U.S. implementers as giving access to freedom. Mike, what I didn't ask you this, but now I'm really curious. How did you decide to become a U.S. implementer? What were some of the things that you're like, this is what I'm gonna
Oh
do?
man.
Because you
So
had several successful businesses and you've
yeah,
done some cool stuff.
God, when did I read Traction? Oh eight maybe? Oh nine, something like that. And I didn't become an implementer till 2022. It wasn't a direct, I didn't just jump in. Although I remember reading it in the back of the book, Gino invites you, if you're interested, give me a call, right? I never did until later. I had a construction company I really did, and I had to sell the construction company quickly. And when I was going through this transition to selling the construction company, I got trained as a coach. And I was an executive coach for about 10 years before I started doing EOS. And the coaching world is really an interesting place. And I'm not a content creator. So I had an okay coaching practice and coaching business, and I worked with a bunch of different companies and did a bunch of different stuff, but I was missing something. And I knew Renee Bohr, who was one of the OGs from EOS, and I had a conversation with him. And when I had a conversation with him, it became apparent that I was an idiot not to do it. So that's really kind of how it came about. But I was like always kind of circling around it, had been around it, talked about it. I was an integrator for a consulting company for a while.
Okay.
But yeah, so it was, I was always kind of around it, but I just didn't ask the question. I was goofing off mostly. So yeah,
What
like
is
everything in my life, it's always been this continual wandering. This was just another one.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, it sounds like you've done a really great job of having fun and approaching life from a perspective of why not?
Well, you see the sign on the back of me. It's not the destination; it's the ride, right? Like I'm a
Yeah.
pretty hardcore motorcycle rider. Was.
Yeah.
And it was really not about where you're going. It was about really the way you got there. It's really about the wandering and the journey of it all. And I really, pretty early on, it was more about that than anything else. So that's what led me to it. And I'm really thankful that I came upon it when I did, that I did it when I did, because I was developed enough where I could actually put my ego aside enough to really, let the content be the content and just, do EOS purely. I think that's really important you do that.
Well, one thing that has just proven to be true and true and true time again is that the person who loves walking is more likely to go further than the person that's in love with the destination.
Yeah.
So, in other words, people are like, oh, you do a podcast. Do you make money from ads? I'm like, no, I don't plan to. And they're like, oh, well, do you get lots of clients from is it your main source of clients? I'm like, not really. And they're like, well, what the heck? Why do you do it? I said, because I like to. Because I
Yeah.
like to have conversations with people like Mike, ask
Yeah.
them questions, tell stories. Did I ever think of myself as a content creator? Not really. I like to do podcasts. And then they're like, oh, well, wow, your channel's really grown. I said, I didn't really expect that, nor did I care, because if no one listened to my podcast and Mike and I are just having a conversation, this happens to be produced, great. And I hope this adds value to somebody else. And I think that is so often the key. That concept is hanging up above your head.
Well,
It's loving the journey, loving the ride.
Right. Well, I think the thing, especially about your podcast, it's first of all, you're consistent about it, and there's a quality to it, and you bring a quality nature to it. It's done well, and you persisted, and so people are going to find it, and that's really the key. It's like, who is it? She's God, I can't think of her name now. Lainey Wilson.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she's an overnight sensation, right? She was playing bars in Nashville for 11 years before she got discovered, right? And now she's maybe the biggest country star in the world, but overnight sensation that took her 11 years to do. It's remarkable. There's something about engaging that is going to pay off.
Are you familiar with the comedian Shane Gillis?
I've heard of him, yeah.
I might have played football against him. I would have been like a sophomore, freshman. He would have been a senior and whatnot. Yeah. But we were in the same conference.
Yeah.
No, not the same town, but like, the same district area. And he went on and for 10 years did stand up
Mm-hmm.
and did this podcast and did his thing and barely made any money. Like,
Right.
did his podcast out of his parents' basement for fun. And
Mm-hmm.
now I think he's the number one highest paid comedy podcast in the world. And he's a guy my age from my area who just said, I like doing this. I'm not going to quit.
Yeah.
Never met him, but like,
there's so much to that. Not quitting is a big deal.
I totally agree. I'm going to ask you, were there times in your career where you were faced with, maybe I should quit? And
yeah.
in those times, like, what was that headspace conversation where you decided not to?
Oh, dude. Well, first of all, there were times when I did quit, and I regret that, and I don't have a lot of regrets, but there were things that I did quit, and there were mistakes that were made, and you learn. I'm of the belief you're either winning or learning.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've learned is from actually those failures, I've learned that once you decide and it's true to you, you just got to gut it out. I have given up an addiction to comfort. I no longer have that addiction. I have a much higher level when I'm in something, and I have very few commitments, but when I'm in, and I take my commitment seriously, and I'm thoughtful about when I commit. But once I commit, I'm in. Like really in, like dog on a pant leg in, crazy.
I think that's what you have to be if you want to play the game of business, though. If you, like we talked about earlier, being a refugee from corporate America, if you want to escape that, then you've got to be a slave to your commitment.
Right.
Like discipline is freedom.
Right. Right. And there were things, being a coach, I was pretty lucky. I did okay, but I never, I was never a $500,000 a year coach, but then, I came over the EOS, and I really just jumped in all the way with EOS. I got this thing called Burning Your Boats, and I did. And it didn't happen right away. It took about 6 months before I really got real traction, but it's been the best thing I've ever done, and and what it does, it provides a lot of clarity for you when you do that. You're not second guessing.
I can still remember one of the road signs on my journey. It was a year into being a fractional CMO, and I had some crazy stuff happen in the first quarter of joining, and newborn kid and this and that.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
All kinds of stuff happened. We don't have to go into that. But I remember I said, you know what? I don't know if this is for me. Maybe I should get a job. And I walked into an interview, and within an hour, they gave me an offer. And I just sat in my car for 20 minutes. And I was just like, what am I doing at this place? Why am I even considering stopping what I've just been working on for the last year? Am I crazy? And I was like, I am just going to go back. I thought about just going back in there and saying, you know what? Thought about it in my car. I'm not doing this. Yeah. And I slept on it, sent an email, and I burned the boats in that reflection period where I was like, then I'm going to be a quitter forever. And it was like, I'm telling you, my 2 weeks, and I 5x'd my income of just committing. No, I mean, I didn't have a great starting point at that time, but still, you got exponential growth right after committing. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's it, man. No, and that's what happens when you commit. Then it just all of a sudden it just opens up stuff. It's one of the things you got to do to break through what's ever stopping you, man.
And sometimes you just need one voice. You just need one person. It could be a stranger. Mm-hmm. It could be someone you never met before, and they just tell you something that sticks with you. That says, you know what? You believed in me when I wasn't sure, so now I really believe in me. I went to a conference 2 months ago, almost to the day. And it was a growth conference. It was acquisition.com, like a scaling workshop. Yeah. And someone said, so what's your acquisition channel? And I told him, oh, this is my plan. And he goes, okay, do that. And I was like, that's your advice? He goes, yeah, you just have to stick with it and just do more and be more consistent. And after that, my entire show tripled in 90 days. And that was more than the first 18 months. And I was like, holy shit, that one 30-second conversation is the only reason that I doubled down. And it's one conversation. It's one realization away from changing your life.
No, man, that's it. That's
So,
awesome.
yeah, I mean, look, I I'm Mike. I'm sure I could keep talking to you, and we can tell all kinds of stories about the ride. I do want to ask you one more question. It's my favorite
Sure,
question.
sure.
Is if you could talk to yourself all the way back when you were an 8-year-old boy, and you could say something to that person, whether they listen or not that you change anything, but what advice would you give yourself at the start of everything, knowing what you know now?
Just follow your heart, man. You know, just follow that belief that's inside you. You know, I think when you really get clear and you really pay attention, that voice comes from somewhere beyond you, and it's the guidance we all need, and it's if we stick to it, it really works. You know, and trust yourself. You know, we don't need a lot of agreement. You know, polling everybody, I don't think is the most effective way to get things done.
True words. What was that commandment? Thou shalt not rule by consensus.
Yeah, that's right. That's one of the EOS 10 commandments. Yeah. Consensus. Yeah. Thou shalt not rule by consensus. Oh my God. Whenever I think about that, I just want to throw up when people want to do that. I don't let this is the stupidest thing you guys could do. Don't do that. That's hilarious.
Well, Mike, it's been a pleasure talking with you, getting to know you better.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
Love the stories. Where can people find you, learn more? Where can people get in touch?
Yeah. I mean, you can go on my LinkedIn page. It's just Mike Shereck on LinkedIn. You can call me 630-643-6336. You can get me at mike.shereck@EOS Worldwide. And I've got a website. It's the shereckgroup.com. So you can get me in any of those places, you know, or you can come out to Naperville, run into me somewhere here, you know. But yeah.
Ride some motorcycle, maybe.
Yeah, it's the weather hasn't been great yet, you know. I don't ride as much as I used to. I used to ride all the time and everywhere. I don't ride so much anymore, but not quite as much. I just have this old vintage 2001, you know, Road King that is in museum condition. It's amazing. It's a work of art. So I really am. I don't want to ride it because it's so exquisite, you know. But it's cool to look at, though. It's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you. Appreciate the conversation. And everyone listening, I appreciate you as well. I hope that you could take some of these stories and these thoughts and make a change in your life, or maybe just get some clarity and decide, this is who I want to be. So if that's the case and you had a good experience listening, I don't run ads in the show. I don't plan to. I would just love if you shared it with a friend. That's it for now. Be well.